Good evening. Welcome to the Art History Festival 2023. I'm Christina Bradstreet, Head of Programmes at the Association for Art History, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this evening's talk as we come to the end of day one of our UK-wide Art History Festival, which runs right from today through to the end of Sunday. The Art History Festival is celebrating and exploring art history, so the study of art from the ancient world to the present day across the globe. And it's for anyone who enjoys art, architecture and design and who wants to deepen those interests. This is our third edition of the festival, and this year we've joined up with 52 partner organisations, including museums and galleries across the UK, from Orkney to Penzance, who are holding a wealth of talks and tours in conversations, workshops and family events in person or online. And our theme this year is colour, inspiration, insight, imagination. So really exploring the importance of colour, its language and symbolism, its expression of emotion, its use in social movements, and its scientific study as well. And since our theme is colour, we just had to do an event around Frank Bowling, one of Britain's most celebrated artists, known for his groundbreaking and colourful paintings. And who better to talk about Frank's use of colour than Frank's son, Ben Bowling, co-director of the Frank Bowling Studio, and curator Eleanor Cripper, who was for the past decade senior curator of modern and contemporary British art at Tate Britain, where she curated the 2019 Frank Bowling exhibition, among a number of other important shows. So Eleanor is now joining Whitechapel Gallery as head of exhibitions, but I'm so pleased that she's able to join us for this conversation. Just a few words of logistics before we get going. Ben and Eleanor will be in conversation for about 50 minutes, and then we'll take 10 minutes for questions at the end. So do write your questions in the Q&A box as you think of them as we go along, and that will really help me to prepare. Thank you. And I expect you're all very familiar with Zoom by now, but just a reminder that you can switch on Zoom's automated captioning if you wish. This is by the captions button along the bottom of the Zoom screen. You might need to click more to find it. And you can also make the PowerPoint bigger or smaller in relation to the size of our speakers. Just hover the cursor over the screen and then drag the vertical line that appears to the left or the right to do that. And then finally, we are recording this event, but rest assured we're not recording you. So I will hand over now to Eleanor and Ben. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you to the Association for Art History for having me. I'm very excited.
You're very welcome. Well, I mean, Ben and Eleanor have been having such a wonderful conversation before we got going. I'm just can't wait for you all to hear it, really. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Christina. Hello, everyone. Hello, Ben.
Hello, Eleanor. Hello, everybody.
How are you doing, Ben?
I'm doing very well indeed. Yeah, thank you very much indeed. So you got some slides for us, Eleanor?
Yes, I do. So Ben and I had a quick catch up to discuss the format, and we felt that probably was best to show slides with pictures while discussing color, as it is such a material subject. And also I will start sharing very soon. And just as a means of introduction, I think we will be in conversation looking at slides for the majority of this session, but we will leave around 5 minutes at the end before questions for you, Ben, to speak particularly to the subject of the archive and legacy, because we know this is a theme the association itself was very interested to hear about. So we decided to leave a sort of short window to address it. So now wish me good luck as I share and try to get the full screen. Okay.
Very good.
So we discussed to probably begin with the very early work because, of course, this is the period when Frank was had graduated from the Royal College of Art, was still working in a figurative manner. His subject was still engaged very much with very difficult social and situations, the conditions of the beggars in Guyana that he remembers in childhood as in this work, but also very much started engaging directly with color, and also was part of a reading group with two others friends. One was a chemist, and having very much conversations rooted in the technical aspects of how color and light functions. And we very much felt that these works show both these sides of the practice, and now at this moment they are sort of very much batting against one another, no? The subject, the beggars on one side, and this incredible working through the colors of the spectrum.
Yeah, yeah. So at this point, Dad is a year out of the Royal College and is, as you say, preoccupied with subject matter, which was part of the Royal College training. It's, you know, figurative training. He was told at the Royal College, we don't, you know, this is not a place where you can be doing abstract art. You mentioned the beggars. This was his mother asked him to wash the hands and feet of a group of homeless people who would come. She would bring into the house on a Sunday, and then give them a meal. And so this very vivid memory of disability and destitution. So the subject matter is, but as you say, the color is there. There's a great clip of him talking about his work in the 60s, where he talks about sort of red into blue, blue into green, green into yellow, yellow into red, and so on. And I mean, it kind of, maybe, I'm not sure that I noticed when I was first looking at these works that essentially he's working through the spectrum, and actually working out working almost like a color chart, really. You've got the geometry, kind of, obviously you can see the influences of Francis Bacon here, Bacon and Goya in the figures and the subject matter, but the color is doing something, I think, interesting and quite different. And this is a repetitive theme across all the figurative works from this period. And I think it carries through into the abstract works as well. Once the figure, once once figuration has disappeared, that preoccupation with color remains.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other very interesting aspect of these paintings is the way it works the figure itself, and is very much learning from the painterly tradition of adding lighter layers, you know, on it's the finals, but they very much bring light and lighter colors. And these sort of white marks, and the way it creates this, you know, extraordinary layer of whites and whites on the figures at the top is also something that will recur in the abstract works, as it brings light and adds fluorescent and lighter colors to the work. I was looking at an interview that Carol Jacobi did, a conversation that did with Frank in 2018, and she very kindly shared, in which Frank references a Van Gogh exhibition he saw in 1960. And he says, Van Gogh's works fire me up to use color. And I think something very interesting historically, of course, is to think we are coming out of the 50s, this period, you know, where often if you work in a gallery, there's a lot of browns and more muted colors. Yeah. And there is also, you know, epochal shift in the 60s of artists really start embracing color, and how Frank does it in a very conscious way, and very much wanting to understand the technicalities of how it actually works. And I think one of the other things is very interesting in this painting, how he's interested in color as pigment, but also in color as light, and the sense of the translucent nature of the color that we see here, that will also continue in his work.
Yeah, I see that. Thank you for that. And now the Van Gogh link, I think, is important, because those yellows just, it does feel very Van Gogh, the sunflowers and so on. And I think that, I mean, it's you know, these works, that they have been seen, but not very much. And of course, this is I think this period is all made with oil paint. So he's thinking about in the solvents, the bases, the pigments, how they work, but eventually will abandon easel painting entirely, using oil paints in favor of acrylic paints and leaving the easel behind. Just a few short years later, actually, within 3-4 years after these were made, that whole thing disappears completely.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, maybe, you know, we have lots of slides. We have another one from this period, but I wonder maybe because we are
so tempting though, isn't it? Because I think that the previous slide of the shaped swan, it actually, the geometry of it echoes the beggars. I just spotted that. And then a borrowing from Bridget Riley. There were two swans, Swan and Swan 2, and the contrasting red and green actually between the two works. And this also has natural materials. It has swan's feathers in it as well. So yeah, I mean, but you're right, we should move on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's very fascinating to see really the transition, you know, as he moves, and is researching, exploring as he moves from one painting to the other. And the other thing we were actually discussing together when looking at this picture is how he starts to use color to move the gaze of the viewer across the canvas. So we can see how the red is in the sort of bottom elements, and then recurs in the middle and acquires this much more material blood sort of like feeling that then we see again in the beak. And how really color here and in lots of Frank's painting is also something that very much guides you and guides the gaze that sort of keeps moving across the surface of the picture. And big birds, the others really important.
Yeah, this is an extraordinary work. This is the prize winner from the first Festival of Negro Arts in Senegal. And I think that one of the things we were talking about when we were chatting was the influence of Mondrian. And when looking at the abstract paintings, you know, as a teenager or in my 20s, and Frank would talk about Mondrian, I'm like, I really don't get it. But here, okay, with the exception of the green, which I know was not a Mondrian color. So the backstory to Frank's involvement with Mondrian is that he was given Piet Mondrian as a subject to write about by Peter de Francia, who was the head of what they called complementary studies at the Royal College. And he hated the idea. He didn't want to be looking at, you know, Dutch abstract painting at all. But he says that it did lead him to have a better understanding of what he was doing, and led to an enduring interest in both geometry and color, and particularly the kind of use of the primaries, red, blue, yellow, and black. We have the addition of green here, which does something to create, I mean, it does this sort of mirroring thing where you've got these two kind of dying swans. Well, there's another story behind that. So you've got a lot of white there, and then this sort of the geometric, and then the hint already with the scoring of the work and the hints of the maps to come. There's also something about the yellows, the 2 or 3 different kinds of yellows, like a lemon yellow and a more yellow ochre, and the way that they sort of work together, and the way that the yellow and the green work together. I think it's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And thinking back on Mondrian is also, I always find that incredibly fascinating that, you know, that Frank's dissertation is available at the Royal College, and I believe certainly in your archive, actually, where I read it. And, you know, the operation that Frank does so young in the dissertation is extraordinary, because he is very much referring to Mondrian grid, linking it directly to the grid that was imposed on Guyana through Dutch colonialism in creating the plantation system and the irrigation system. And so it's very much reflecting back on Mondrian and the grid as something that is visually really exciting, but also is a form of purifying, simplifying, and imposing that logic and projecting on the land. And I think it's very interesting for me to think of that also in relation to color, because the color in Frank generally, and here, there is always impurity. There is always that sense that, anything which is generative and the exciting generative nature of the painting comes from the impure nature of the color. And I think that sort of sense that what it does with paint and color is always mixing it up, in a way making it dirty, making it layered, inserting material. There is something also very much, I think, that is deliberate in its choice of, it's not pure color. It's doing something, which is much more layered and complex with it.
I completely agree with that. I mean, I heard myself saying earlier today that Frank is to the bone anti-essentialist. The idea of purity of anything he totally rejects, and that's whether we're talking about ethnicity or race or culture, or the way that influences come together in the human body or in relationships, and in paint. So although he's clearly influenced by minimalism, which was all the rage at this period, close friends with Marcia Hafif, a kind of arch minimalist really, and others who were the color field people, very much interested in pure color. But he acknowledges it, accepts it. He's a formalist, sees the idea of purity, and then breaks it and dirties it, smudges it.
Very much so. What do we have next? And here we just have two slightly later examples as he's further moving, away from figuration into abstraction. How is very much again playing with, using primary color, always inserting green, which coincidentally he had told me believes is the most complex and mysterious of colors. And also is very much deliberately using complementary colors, different type of reds, and again red becoming this color that he will explore across all the entire nuances and tones. Do you want to say anything else?
No, I mean, well, another underexplored period. I mean, when people write about pop art and its color and the primaries and so on, Frank tends not to be referenced, but to me these are should be considered as, I mean, look, in my entirely unbiased opinion, these should be seen as icons of the pop period. It's right there, you can see Pete Blake, you can see all of the stuff that was going on in that period. There's a synthesis here in terms of subject matter, geometry, and color.
Yeah, absolutely. And just the sheer pleasure, if you look at this series, Frank made these silkscreen images of his mother's house, still when he was at Camberwell, and then continues using them for years. But you can see they are in different color, different format, different backgrounds. So there is this insistence on him going back to Guyana, to his childhood, to his mother. And at that time when Guyana was getting independence, of course, also it's 1966, but also experimenting with all these different variables and colors as he progresses in the series. And the mother's houses, of course, will keep returning into the more abstracted works as we move. So that there is this lingering presence of the silkscreens. And I want to show this image mostly because, again, is this how is developing his language. You have now South America has appeared. The very first time I met Frank was asking about, have you ever been to South America? And that sort of connection geographically with the South, and particularly Guyana being part of the continent, but also how he's playing and doing this stenciled image of the mass of South America with a darker color on white, and then the negative, and very much having this sort of formal play. And again, how he's taking us through the use of red from the house on the top left to Guyana on the bottom right, and then these red bands at the border. So there is this incredible sort of circle, which is about place, displacement, and color, and they're all sort of in dialogue with each other.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think that there's a sort of slightly somewhat yin yang thing going on here. You've got, so the stencil is the two stencils. One is so the left-hand panel is the stencil placed on the canvas with then spray around the edges, or paint, probably spray. And then the right-hand panel is the interior of the stencil sprayed. So there's a kind of yin yang thing going there. And I also think that there, as you say, that the interplay between the reds. And then the other thing I noticed, which I think is fascinating, is he's always been interested in collage and patchwork. His mother was a dressmaker, milliner, seamstress. His current work, I mean, he's, even though he's fast approaching his 90th birthday, he's still in the studio 3 times a week for 2 or 3 hours at a time, making these enormous collage. And I think the edges that are so much part of his later work, 80s onwards, and yet there they are, the edges, and it kind of functions as a diptych somehow. And just the interplay between in that central panel, the yellow, the green, the orange coming together, sitting on this kind of deep purple, and the green, red, green. The inventiveness, I think, is extraordinary.
Yeah. And it was already in the Big Bird picture already that zip in the middle is fabric. So it's really, these 2 sides of the picture. And then we jump into these, pools of nearly monochrome color.
So, it's a jump thematically and in terms of color and form, because the figurative elements have almost completely disappeared, and yet this is like a year or 2 later, right? This is just so importantly, there's a geographical relevance here, that he's leaving London, frustrated with London. His career's not going the way he wants it to go. He finds himself pigeonholed as a Black artist. Seems not to be able to be allowed just to be an artist. He's feeling the pressure to be in a box, particularly kind of making political art. So he leaves London for New York, and these are the first works that he's making in New York. They're large. They're whatever it is, something like they're 10-foot square, getting to that sort of size, and really an exercise in pure color. But the figure is there, so it's 9 squares. I think 3 mothers' houses across the top, a little indistinct. The top left-hand corner, you can see the it looks like a flare almost. It's the palm tree from Mother's House with orange around it. So 3 mothers' houses across the top, 3 South Americas in the middle row, and 3 Guyanas across the bottom. But they are vehicles to explore yellow. This is like looking at the center of a Van Gogh sunflower, right? With all the lemon yellow, the ochre, the cadmium yellow, all kind of working together. And again, the edges, the red and the blue edge, almost as though it was mariflage, or as though it was like an addition. And yet there it is, painted in. Extraordinary.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, the subject's still there and providing the structure, but receding, and the color coming to the surface. And maybe it's also useful to mention in this context, as you said, he had moved to New York. And the important thing that happened in New York is that Frank had a very much larger studio. He started being able to work on larger pieces of canvas and working between the floor and the wall, and very much using the floor to create pools of water. So now he's moved from oil to acrylic. And acrylic, of course, is the medium that I think is perfect for Frank in terms of, diluting with water. And Frank starting very much using the medium to dilute it, add water, very much creating sort of pools of water in the canvas that he sort of clips at the 4 sides, and then allowing the water to move the pigment and create this very mesmerizing effect as he sort of drive pigment across the surface. Shall we look at the next one? Who?
So this is one of my favorites, actually. The intensity of this, pink, for want of a better word. I'm sure there's a cerise, I don't know, there's a vocabulary of pinks here. It probably doesn't have a map in it. It's kind of purely abstract. The figure is kind of completely gone. As you say, made on the floor with the patterning, the kind of purple and the yellows here, the pattern coming from a sort of like a found geometry from what's coming up from the floor. We haven't said anything about titles. Dugla is a word which doesn't exist in England. It's a Guyanese word to refer to a person who has one East Indian, Indo-Caribbean parent and one Afro-Caribbean, one like an Indian parent and a black parent. So a particular kind of mixed race person or person of mixed heritage. Very important in Guyana because of the racial politics of Guyana, which has almost equal sizes of descendants of slaves, so African people of African origin and people who arrived later after the abolition of slavery, who were indentured laborers brought from India, as well as Guyana has this incredible mix with Portuguese and indigenous people and Middle Eastern people. It's very, very diverse. But I think he's kind of playing a sort of game here. I think there's something, this sort of this intense pink painting titled Dugla just feels like there's some kind of game going on, which is a reference to skin color and typology, as well as the reference to color. It's a go figure.
No, these are incredibly interesting topic. This was, of course, the time Frank was also very engaged with other Black artists in the United States very much. Frank said the moment I went to the US was, in a way, racism was much more overt, but in a way there was something positive in that because it was much more tangible than it was in the UK. So in a way we felt able to come together and form a coalition to sort of push back. And yet Frank was one of those artists who very much, it was clear to him by then he didn't want to push back in terms of the subject of his work.
Yeah.
And that through his work, he very much wanted to express his possibility to be free and to self-define himself through form, through color, and to more abstracted idioms. And yet, these themes keep coming back in the titles. And I also wonder if there is something about, the situation that he experienced, the social struggle against racism in the US. It was part of, there is also, in a way, a solidarity that he carries in the titles that he feels he doesn't want to carry in the actual subject of the work, but he continued to insert in this very poetic titling.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think that, colonial education encouraged the idea in what was then British Guyana that London was the metropolis, it was the center, the heart of empire, and we were all British subjects. Britishness was a global phenomenon, and nobody really talked about the color bar, the color line in England. So that's, arriving in England in 1953, leaving in 1966, arriving in the USA in the kind of the heat of the civil rights movement, with, the assassination of Martin Luther King, the assassination of Malcolm X, Kennedy. This is a febrile, it's an incredible moment. But he doesn't want to make paintings that are about political events. He doesn't want to make political paintings. He wants to make paintings which are about paint, are about color. And I think this is his response. And yet at the same time, there is in the titling, and of course in the bars and of New York City, these are topics that you have to talk about. But when he's in the studio, it's about paint, color, light.
And another one from very much the same period. I wanted to include this, I mentioned Frank, because of the very different, paler pastel color, the use of the fluorescent paint underneath. And I feel often Frank is associated with much bolder colors, but actually he often uses a lighter palette, and there is this, you know, there are these very soft, I would say softer, you know, pictures. And I think there is something about that softness, that sense of fragility, the light, that are in aesthetics associated with the beautiful rather than with the sublime. That I think Frank Inawi also deliberately embraces at this point, you know, embraces the beauty as well as the sublime, embraces the softness and light as well as the ruggedness and the sort of more darker sense of vastness of his bolder picture. And there is also a play between the feminine and the masculine, I feel, in these choices.
Yeah, I mean, this
masculine war interpreted in these terms.
Yeah, I mean, the contrast with Douglas, the previous work, couldn't really be more vivid in terms of palette. It shares the geometry with Melibus Decides, with the repetition of Mother's House, South America and Guyana, so it has the same grid. But the colors in this, I mean, the reproduction doesn't do it justice. Being in front of this work, and it's 3.5 meters tall, is just, you're enveloped in color. I mean, in your show, Eleanor, at Tate Britain, and that end wall, you know, I would just sit there for hours and hours and just be absorbed this. So we recently saw it in New York, and we in a storage space, a viewing room, and I had the inspiration to ask, what does it look like under UV light? So they turned off the lights, closed the doors, and got one of these UV torches out. The painting is a riot. It is a riot of color. You can't really see it, but the bottom half, with the pink bits around the map of Guyana and the tail of South America, are the most incredible, vivid, fluorescent pinks and purples. So the fluorescent pigments that he was using, from like metallics and fluorescent pigments and pearlescence, produce a new kind of light. And it's a light that is actually imperceptible to the human eye under normal daylight. You have to use UV light. And the whole painting, actually, yellows and greens and pinks. And one of his claims, one of Dad's claims, is that paint color exudes its own light. It isn't just reflected light. It is the paint color light exists in the paint and emanates from it like luminescence. And I think this work, for me, it's very ethereal, it's very silvery, it's easy to walk past it. But if you sit in front of it, the color just washes over you, and you're pulled into it. And the title, Raining Down South, it's what it's like. It really feels like that. There's a feeling that comes from the color.
Oh, that's beautiful. Dan, you speak so beautifully about these pictures. And color is I find a very difficult subject to talk with, because it is so emotional and so,
yeah. Well, this is there's clearly a lot of emotion in this work. So this work, and again, you have to be in front of it to see it, really. The squares, the orange squares, are photographs of Dad's his eldest and his youngest son, Dan and Sasha. And they were stencils from probably the year or so earliest, because they are like 3 or 4 years in the photographs, stenciled onto the canvas, and then flooded with this incredible incredible pink and green paint. And, he's in New York, been in New York for 2 years. He's not the best dad in the world, let's face it. He's living thousands and thousands of miles away from his 3 sons, and yet they're there with him, right, on the canvas. And the title, Bartica, that's the name of his hometown, the town that he was born in, up the Essequibo River. It's the kind of gateway to the interior of Guyana, a gold mining town where his father was a policeman in the 40s, 30s. And it's so I think the color is expressing something very personal to him. There's an expression of origins, of family ties, which is kind of, it's not the most important thing for him at this point. It's all about color. And yet he's betraying, like I'm a bit of amateur psychoanalysis here, he's betraying his connection to his sons and to his mother and to his father, to the family and to his birthplace.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think you're right. There is something that is particularly raw, you know, in these pictures. And I feel, you know, when you look at the work and even in the reproduction, that sense that there is, it's raw, it's very intense, it's very deep. And I think the subjects here very much in this photograph, the sort of memory of these photographs comes to the surface subject. And this, of course, it's a sort of later word that also uses stencil images, but with a much different use of color. And this sort of uses appearing of the bands of color, which again will become a sort of recurring theme. And you can also see, of course, the photograph of his mother.
Yeah, and the sons, and also this, like I only seeing it in Boston last year, this white space and the red, white, and blue on the edge. I mean, it's all kind of got these sort of, you know, very, very intense reds, golds, greens, and yet they're kind of just on the edge is this white space with a red, white, and blue edge, like a painting.
This negative space, no?
Yeah, or a space which is expressing something. I don't know whether it is what's white: peace, grief, memory, the absence. There's a presence there, kind of a statement of something absent, something missing.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the title again, Middle Passage, which is so charged in terms of, you know, the history of slavery, and it's one of the two pictures that they titled Middle Passage that year.
Oh, well, huge. 21 feet, 7 meters across. And yeah, you have the map references, and also this weird Australia connected with an umbilical cord to somewhere around, you know, the edge of China.
Yeah.
But really, it's 7 meters, 21 by 10 of pure color. Except not pure color in the sense of it's all about color, but there's nowhere in the canvas where you know, as you said earlier, Elena, the yellows that are dirtied, they are and made more beautiful as a consequence, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you know, I mean, we've been talking a lot about the, you know, being abstract, but the truth is the insistence on, you know, the global South and the Middle Passage and, you know, Guyana itself and his hometown. I mean, they are truly enduring and central. And Texas, Louise.
It's been on show at the Bourse de Commerce in Paris. Well, and also worth mentioning that this was up in the Piccadilly Lights earlier this year, May, June, at, you know, it's nearly 7 meters across. But on the Piccadilly Lights, I was there one evening when it was a rainy evening on the big, you know, for 2.5 minutes, and the way that the light reflected from the rain, and it was like being in a bath of reds and yellows and oranges. It was quite a deeply moving experience.
Yeah, and it's
we're going to have to crack on, aren't we, Elena? Because we don't
have much time. It's
we've only got to 1971. It's still another 40 years.
We will not get through all the slides. Do you think we should move forward a little?
Let's skip on a little. Let's skip on a little bit and see where we get to.
Yeah, I mean, the zip, of course, is this, you know, pure exercise in color. I mean, it's the Frank built this platform with the purpose of being able to pour these different colors and layer them. And again, you see the joy of, you know, the the trials, the mixing of different colors, but also the accident and how color mixes differently in different works, but also creating different bands alongside the side of the work, using, again, very soft pinkish colors, as well as, you know, going all primary with black. So yeah, they're just a really extraordinary visual.
Yeah,
piece.
I think it's I studied, you know, this was in your show, Tony's Anvil. It's a reference to Cairo. It's a comment on structure and on sculpture as well. It's a monolith. But I kind of thought it's like a Mondrian. It's like a melting Mondrian. It's a Mondrian on acid. It's a Mondrian. Just Mondrian tripping, and just kind of.
That's really beautifully said, Mondrian tripping. And then again, the much more ethereal moment of the early 80s, this, you know, really incredible phase where the you know, is still working just with acrylic paint, by using different formal devices to create these round shapes and these beautifully sort of cosmological pictures that are the sort of moment that then precedes, you know, the opposite, is very physical, you know, these truly sublime, vast, rugged, heritage pictures, which are full of material embedded with acrylic gel and foam. And this picture is just extraordinary. I have a very clear memory of looking at it with Sonia Boyce, and her telling me how fascinating she found these pictures and the colors, and this sense there is something, this idea there is something is contaminated. There is a sort of this, you know, contaminated pool that both attracts and repels you. And these incredibly strong emotions in both the colors and the formal qualities of the picture engender.
Yeah, and I think there's also a willingness to engage with the ugly. I mean, wintergreens. Do we have wintergreens? Yes, we have wintergreens. So it's
excellent.
Yeah. So the period at Skowhegan, being an artist in residence at upstate Maine in the USA, I'm gradually coming to terms with wintergreens. It is so dense. It is not pretty. It's ugly. It is, you know, when you get up close to it, it is so dense with all this packing material and all this stuff embedded in it, and it's like it is like being in a rainforest. It's like being in the jungle and being stuck there. I mean, you know, I think Frank has rejected the idea that his paintings should be pretty. I mean, they are pretty, and you know, obviously the galleries especially like the pretty paintings. But the ugly 80s, I think it's time. We need to look again at the 80s, because the 80s is a period which has been neglected. But the intensity of these greens is just unbelievable.
Absolutely. And I think I mentioned to you, but I think I should repeat that, you know, when the first time I brought, you know, the layout to Frank with the selection, I thought we've been discussing so far and the pictures were really key. Frank's telling me, oh yeah, it's great, but Elena, you've only selected the beautiful pictures. We need more ugly pictures. And I absolutely love this idea, you know, of it was a really transformative moment for me, this understanding, of course, you know, that sort of sense of what is beautiful and what is ugly, and how the work itself pushes so often in that direction, particularly in works like that. Also, these pictures, of course, made me think of Constable, you know, the 6-footers, and Frank's love of Constable, and the way Constable uses these, again, you know, white highlights to create lights in these very dark pictures, which he does here with the silvery outlines, which is, you know, when you see the work really are very prominent, sort of draw you towards the surface. We probably should need to stop very soon.
How about this, Eleanor? How about we move on to just a few words about the archive, but maybe could we keep the slides going, and as I'm sort of talking, just so that people can see the works?
Why not?
Yeah. Okay.
I will.
But I won't talk about the works, and I'll keep it super brief, because I know that we really want to give people time. So I'm going to keep this to like just 3 or 4 minutes. So Dad's nearly 90 years old. He's 89. He'll be 90 on in February. And 5 years ago, asked my brother Sasha Bowling and I to go to the Institute for Artist Estates in Berlin to understand a bit more about how to develop an artist's legacy. It was a workshop involving, the galleries, the legal side, museum people, archives, and so on. And we were about 25 sons and daughters and grandchildren of artists coming together to learn about how this all works. Because Sasha's a filmmaker, my background is as a criminologist, and although we've been around paintings and all our lives, the question of how do you manage this? How do you deal with the work? How do you preserve the paintings? How do you engage with museums? How do you work with galleries? How do you work with art historians? What's the catalogue raisonné? I'd never even heard the word. What is art history as an institution? What's curation? All of that was new to us. So it was a baptism of fire, really. So now at Peacock Yard in London, where Dad has been working since 1984, we have obviously the studio where he works 3 or 4 times a week. We also have a very rich archive. We have an archivist, Anastasia Alberti, formerly of Tate, who is busily engaged in arranging, cataloguing the work. We are beginning to engage with scholars of all stages of development. We have now a number of PhDs, including Indy Chowdhury, who's getting close towards the end of her work at the Courtauld, who's working on the white paintings. So we are getting to a point where we will be able to engage more broadly with art history as an institution, and we're doing our best to understand the work, its color, its geometry, the thingness of it, how Dad works, obviously watching him working in the studio, understanding how he has worked over, his work has touched 8 decades, from the 1950s to the 2020s, a 65-year or more career. So it's kind of overwhelming. My work as a criminologist is kind of come to an end. Sasha as a filmmaker also. And we're dedicating our lives to doing what we can to interpret Dad's work and bring it to a wider audience, and making his work lasting and global, and making it new and fresh for new audiences. That's kind of the mission, really. And it's been an extraordinary journey, and continues to be so. So thank you very much indeed. Yes, these are the most recent works on paper that are just, used the word sublime earlier, Eleanor. I do feel that these are like seascapes. They're like constables. So perhaps that's enough, and we can turn to questions.
Absolutely. I think I might just run. I think this was our last slide. Beautiful, very neat picture. Okay, I will stop sharing.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much. That was so special to hear that. So if you've got questions, do write them in the chats. But before we came live, you were having a really interesting conversation between you about lighting and the effect that lighting in exhibitions and the gallery space has on his work. So I wondered if you could share some of that.
Well, I came into working with Eleanor while the Tate show was being developed. So I, coming to this completely fresh, naive, and there was a question of how should the show be lit? Not a question that I'd really thought of before. Various options in terms of the degree of yellow and blue light in the, not pigment, in the actual light, the artificial light, plus how much daylight would be used. And Eleanor very kindly said to Frank, how would you like it lit? So we went and we looked, and how a painting is lit. I mean, when it's daylight, it changes from as the day moves on. Direct sunlight does one thing, muted light does another. Artist studios are famously typically north facing, so you get more of a regular light. But it was an extraordinary experience. It never occurred to me, except the knowledge that the paintings change under different light. So I thought it was a wonderful thing, Eleanor, to have the options to think about how the paintings will be shown.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And of course, we were discussing earlier something that is every painter works with different sort of light conditions. And Frank has natural, some natural light coming into the studio through the door, but primarily he works with this quite harsh, tube lighting. So of course the work is always very different the moment you bring it into the galleries. And I was very aware of how you see the works in a completely different way, because I had seen some of them in different conditions. I had been, just to give an example, to upstate New York to see Silver Birch, which was shown just on the side of a massive window. And it was incredibly, very ethereal and very silvery. And when I brought it into the galleries, when we didn't have natural light, it was really dark and visceral. It was a completely different experience. And I just, it was a very good process to go through options with Frank and actually look at different light options in the room. So the final one, apart from the very early work, which are too light sensitive, was to have a minimum of daylight coming in that really bring in the cooler but very alive type of lighting, which was then combined with artificial light.
Thank you. Okay, and so Lorraine was just so struck by the greens and reds and yellows that keep coming through in his works, and she wondered if that's a reference to his own heritage in some way.
Well, I'd like to link that with Nicole's question about whether Frank's art is political, even though it wasn't his intention. So I think the two are linked in the sense that I would say his intention was to play with and work with paint, whether it's easel painting using oil paint or the acrylic paints on the floor. He wants to see what happens when the paint spreads and bleeds over the unprimed surface, what happens with layers of acrylic paint being brought up one over another. He talks about dark green and indigo go over orange and pink. Stripping, spilling, pouring. It's all about paint. It's all about color. And he's not painting a thing, certainly since being purely abstract. So, I mean, Who's Afraid of Barney Newman is probably the best example. And in a way, I'm glad we didn't select it, because it's so red, gold, and green. It's so the colors of the Guyanese flag. It's so the colors of African liberation. And yet, when Frank's asked about it, he's like, absolutely not. It's not about that. It's Rasta colors. No. It's about it's a comment on Barney Newman, and it's going beyond, red, yellow, and blue. This is actually changing the script somewhat. But and same thing with politics, that he is making these paintings that are about color and about geometry and about memory. And yet when you name a painting Middle Passage, it's obviously kind of about slavery at some level. So I think that there is intention, and then there is the kind of effervescence, the emergence of an unconscious things, whether that is a reference to home or colors that are in the ether around African liberation and the liberation of, post-colonial liberation and political comment. So I think that there is it's a rather confusing kind of interplay between direct intention and conscious bubbling up of something from below. But ultimately it's about paint and about making something that catches the eye, that will draw you in, that will hold you in front of the painting and want you to look further and look in deep. Does that chime with you, Eleanor?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I actually have, I had selected some quotes which I didn't get to read, but I was thinking this is probably a good time. It's the 1971 catalog of the Whitney exhibition. It's the first exhibition that is a solo show dedicated to Black artists in New York at the Whitney. And there is a long interview. It's a beautiful, transcript of Frank speaking, for anyone interested to look at that. And there are two very interesting passages. In one, Frank says, "I don't believe as a painter in the idea of Black art, but it's obvious the Black experience is universal." And that is very much making a point about his own experience and how that is, of course, a defining personally and universally, experience. But then he goes on saying, "The book says red is to green at a certain ratio, and I'm very conscious of that. But I think the very basic drive which keeps me constant is the fact that I need to push the ideas as found over the edge, where it happens for me, that is on my painted surface." So color is a very personal dilemma. I'm adjusting color almost entirely through emotional leads. And I think this text is very keen, he's saying absolutely that Black experience is universal, is usually important, is defining, but the color, I want to push something that is more personal and is emotional, and that, it's very different from Black art. And yet I also want to add something else, because as advert for Darby English book, 1971, The Year of Color, because this is a very important book, because in a way what English does here is actually to make an argument that color and modernism more broadly are pushing political needs about a deep desire for what he call a robust freedom and a need for self-expression independently and beyond being defined by the color of your skin. And that there is a political dimension in choosing color as this sort of way of expressing yourself independently from this prescriptive definition. So I think it's a very multifaceted way in which you can actually answer.
Wonderful, wonderful.
And then finally, I thought this is a really lovely question from Rebecca, if not too personal. She asks, Ben, if you feel you've got to know your father better through a growing understanding of his artworks, and how your relationship has changed with him as you've engaged more with his art.
Yeah, it's been a 180 degree, a radical shift. Being a son of a painter is not always easy. It's been said many times that the paintings are his children. And I say, no, your sons are your children. But the engagement, yes, I've learned a huge amount. We're extremely close. Sasha, my brother, and I, we meet with Frank and his wife Rachel, our stepmom Rachel, every Friday at 4 o'clock. He is the boss, even though we are doing our best to preserve and protect and promote his legacy, everything comes from him. Every decision, whether it is about which shows to be involved in, group shows, solo shows, etc., how it's to be interpreted. So yeah, and with Sasha, we didn't grow up, we're from different mums, half brothers. We didn't grow up together. We were, friendly for most of our lives, but the last 5 or 6 years, we speak every day. We are traveling together all the time, and it's been an extraordinary, kind of moving, wonderful family experience. you know, Frank's grandchildren are involved in supporting. His great-grandchild, Nye, who's 3 years old, comes and visits the studio. He's a wonderful little boy, little blondie. And yeah, it's cemented us, it's brought us together as a family, which is absolutely crucial for us, you know, a successful development of an artist's legacy. You need family harmony, you need unanimity, and you need to be able to speak with a single voice. And that is, you know, Sasha and I are interlocutors. We engage Frank, we're questioning him all the time, but we're also like, you know, we are channeling him into our lives. And yeah, so the short answer is yes, we have become very, very close. And, you know, when you're moving towards your 90th birthday, you know, you need a lot of support, and we need guidance and inspiration. So it's so nice to see so many comments about how Dad's work has inspired people. It inspires us. His work ethic is second to none. You know, there aren't many people who are working at the age of 89. You know, for many, many years, he worked every day, Christmas Day, birthdays, whatever, he worked every day. So yeah, he's an inspiration, and we've become very, very close in recent years. It's a great question. Thank you.
Wow. And finally, where can people see his work, and are there any exhibitions coming up in the UK?
So there are a number of works in permanent collections. Mirror is at Tate Britain. There is a painting called Rachel in honor of our stepmom, which is in Tate Liverpool right now. Not yet announced. So Claridge's art space has letting the cat out of the bag, has a show on Paradise as a group show coming up in October. No solo shows planned. We want to do something for Dad's 90th birthday in February. Petworth House, I think it is, has a National Trust house, has a work. So they're here or there, but no solo shows. Maybe next year, but certainly the year after. In the meantime, you've got to find them where you can.
Well, thank you so much. That's just been absolutely wonderful to hear from you both, and just to have the privilege of listening into your conversation, really. So thank you so much for doing this, and thank you everyone for all your questions as well. I'm sorry we didn't quite get to all of them, but I know that Ben's been reading your comments as well. So thank you so much, and keep with us for the festival, for the Art History Festival. We've got more coming up throughout this week, right through to Sunday evening. You can find our festival programme on our website, which is forarthistory.org.uk, and you can also follow us on social media at For Art History to see what else we've got coming up. And there are lots of events, as I said, at museums and galleries around the country, so hopefully something near you, as well as more online events coming up as well. So we'll leave it there, and thank you. Enjoy the rest of your evenings, everyone. Thank you, and goodbye.
Much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.